Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ActDefy's Connect series. I'm your host, Ellie Wang and Hannah Lee, and we're so excited to continue the series where we connect with different advocates and leaders and change makers in our society. And today we're super honored to be joined by Indiana State Representative Victoria Garcia Wilburn, who is a dedicated advocate for public health, mental wellness, and community-centered policy. And her work in the Indiana House has made a real difference for Hoosiers all across the state. So we're so excited to have her today. So thank you so much for joining us. And would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, hello. Yes, the district that I represent is House District 32. And so I help represent the cities of Carmel, Fishers, and the northernmost part of Indianapolis, known as the NORA community. And Ellie, did you make that term up yourself, community-centered policy? I love that. Anna, can you make sure that we write that down? I'm going to start using that because that is absolutely what I do.
Yeah, it's
Community-centered policy. That's beautiful.
yeah, I did some like research on what you did, and I think it's ama what you've done. I think it's amazing. So yeah. Say that. Yeah, so our first question for you is what motivated you to run for representative in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. I've always been knowledgeable about our political landscape ever since I was as young as I can remember. I remember watching presidential elections as a child with my father and begging to stay up to see who the winner was. And so I've just always been really intrigued about our representation and our lawmakers and how their policies impact the country and, quite frankly, the world. Um, I moved to Indiana about 25 years ago now, and we decided to make our family here. And as I was raising my kids, I have three children, ages 19 through 13. And as they became older, I was starting to kind of discover who I was after motherhood and led me to leadership and development training. So I became a member of the prestigious leadership training program called Hoosier Women Forward. And that really inspired me to realize that I had the potential to one day run for office. I was invited to give a congressional testimony in front of the Health and Energy Commerce Committee in DC right after COVID. And it was really to expand loan opportunities and mentorship and grant funding for minority students so that they could pursue healthcare careers. And that was a life-changing experience. After that committee, the chairwoman of the committee stepped down and said, I think that you belong on the other side of the table, which really kind of just kind of blew me away that she saw some sort of potential in me. 2 days later, when I returned to Indiana, I received a phone call from a current legislator, Representative Ed Delaney, and he notified me that because of redistricting, again, this was done, we do this every 10 years. Because of redistricting, I was sitting in a brand new House seat, Indiana House seat, with no intention of the person that was holding the seat. He had no intention of running. So it was going to be called an open seat. And he said that he had heard a lot of great things about me and believed that I could win that seat. And so I chose to believe him.
Yeah, it's a really great story. And especially since you have some children, you have a lot of experience with children. Why do you think it's like important to believe for young people to engage with government and public policy, especially early in their lives?
Yeah, I just think it's important to understand that the world is a lot bigger than the four walls of your home. Really early on, it has been a kind of commitment that my husband and I have had to really make sure that our children recognize that there are people that live in our community that are less fortunate than us. And so during birthday parties, it was not uncommon for them to also hold, a canned food drive for our local shelter, or, during holidays for them to organize toy drives for the children in our community. And so as they have been getting older and have seen me enter into politics, they've been very intrigued and involved. And I think that is part of the bargain, understanding that your participation in democracy is what makes it work.
For sure, for sure. So could you just walk us through a moment within the community advocacy that directly influenced you to make a decision or some sort of policy outcome?
Yeah, so again, I think I'm pulling from my own story here. So my first year when I was elected, the reason why mental health is so important to me is not only am I an addiction researcher in my role at Indiana University, we've also had some instances of mental health within my own family. So, my husband is a retired police officer and is retired due to a psychological retirement. He has been diagnosed with chronic PTSD. And so, those instances in the police department really became kind of cumulative trauma. So, his role was he was the public information officer. And a public information officer goes to the scene of every single violent, heinous, newsworthy crime. So you can imagine that those scenes are pretty devastating. And so police officers, on average, intersect with about 70% more of traumatic events than the regular person does. And so he just didn't have the tools to really kind of help regulate himself and to stay healthy. And so unfortunately, he had to leave behind a profession that he really, really loved for his own emotional well-being and safety. And so I made a commitment to him that if I ever had the ability to help make change, that I would. I never wanted another family to go through what we did in his journey to healing, or learning to really to live with PTSD. And so, was kind of as I, had won, I was thinking about what kind of that first piece of legislation would be. And so I met with the Carmel Police Department, Fishers Police Department, and Indianapolis Police Department, and the state police and said, if we can provide more mental health training, do you think that people could stay in their careers longer? And they said 100%. We want every officer to have access to mental health and resources. And so when I opened up this bill and filed it, I actually had no idea that PTSD was really common in firefighters as well. And so the fire community came out in support. And so it was just a really moving display of compassion and empathy, and to recognize that we're all human and all have struggles. And I was so proud of their bravery when they were testing in support of the bill, because it really helps to address that stigma that heroes don't, suffer. They don't have mental health battles. And so I think that was a huge display of community and unity, that people of all walks of life came across the state to help support this bill.
That's really inspirational. Yeah, in general, like, what do you think a day to day as a representative looks like?
Uh, well, I think when you take the role as a public servant seriously, that your calendar belongs to the public. So I take countless meetings throughout the year with people that want to meet and talk to me about their issues and to explain to me what's important to them. I meet with everybody, whether they agree with me or disagree with me, whether they have an idea or whether they want me to help them formulate an idea. I think it's important to be responsive. And so it looks like a lot of meetings. And then there's this really short window for actual lawmaking. And the lawmaking process is cumbersome, and it has, requires a lot of steps and requires a lot of attention and detail. So, session is that part where I get to help actually make my bills become a law, and that's quite a feat. There's 100 members of us, and so you can imagine how many bills are filed every year, and just a very small percentage of those actually become a law. But it's an exciting career. I do still hold it as an immense privilege, even though I think there's been threats to kind of the respect and decorum of the institution. And I would love to see ourselves find our way back to civil discourse.
For sure. And just to build off of, different policies and bills, is there something that a specific bill or policy that you worked on that you're very proud of? I know that you worked on a lot of mental health bills, but is there like any specific one in particular?
Yeah, I would say, a bill that took kind of two tries was making sure that people had access to different harm reduction tools. And so, you guys are high schoolers. I've worked with a lot of high school students throughout my years as a researcher, and one high school in particular is very special to me. And the name of that high school is Hope Academy Recovery High School, and it's Indiana's only recovery high school for teenagers. So that means teenagers in recovery can address both their academic needs and their mental health needs. And so, an important part for me is to make sure that they can continue to see another tomorrow as they heal. And so, harm reduction tools like test strips make sure that we're keeping the entire community safe. And so, was a really good lesson for me to learn that like I can champion something, but the outcome isn't always success on the first try, but the collaboration is part of it that is key. And so really helping my colleague, Representative Jenny Meltzer, help then pass her version of my bill the next session was something that showed really good bipartisan support.
Yeah, and then our last question we have for you is like in general, especially since we're kind of nearing the end of our session, do you have like some particular issues that you're passionate about, especially since within ActDefy we have like the power to really convey your message to the public? And obviously like a public worker, so I bet you have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, well, my bills are already all filed for next session. I think a bill that I'd like to bring to your attention is surrounding emergency notification. I'm sure you are all thinking about college and those college years, and you are, by the time you go to college, you're considered legally an adult. And so when you're filling out all the paperwork for the registrar's office and they have you put an emergency contact down, it's actually optional. You don't have to put an emergency contact down, and it's a space that a lot of students actually just overlook or say that they'll go back to later. But unfortunately, sometimes the unimaginable happens on campus, whether, it's a medical emergency or crisis, whether it's something that's unexpected or a tragic accident, you need access to help. And you would want, your friends or family members that you hold in high regard to be with you at your bedside when, you were going through the unimaginable. So for students that actually don't designate an emergency contact, they can be left alone in those situations. And so my bill would make it mandatory for every secondary education institution to require students to place an emergency contact. It doesn't have to be your parents, although as a parent of a college student, I would really want it to be me, but you guys would get to decide. Maybe it's your best friend or an aunt or uncle that you really trust. And so we want you to put somebody so that the university can get in contact with your family, because as a parent, there's no greater stressor, as a loved one, there's no greater stressor than not knowing where your family member is. And so I think that is just, a good practice. And sometimes we have to create laws to make sure that everybody gets on the same page and that every student that comes to Indiana to go to college is treated with the same amount of respect, and it doesn't vary based upon where they go to school.
Yeah, so that just wraps up our meeting today. We just want to thank you so much for joining us today and reminding us how important mental health and education is to our community. And your perspective and advice will really mean a lot to all the students who might be watching this in the future. And we're incredibly grateful to have you today on our series. So we hope you have a great rest
Awesome.
of your day.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks.